How do you reinvent yourself through creativity, curiosity, and technology? Ash Amin built Toronto Talks as a space for meaningful conversations, using AI as a tool for growth and healing. At its core, his story is about honoring friendship, building community, and staying curious. This is Ash Amin on My Most Authentic Life.
Thank you so much, Fetty. It's a real honor and a pleasure to be on the show. I've been a fan. I've listened to the show a few times, and I love what you've got going on here. And I'm really just honored and excited to be here with you.
Likewise. And like I said, your story is really compelling and relatable. And it's really a story that is grounded in identity. And through the course of the episode, I think we'll get into that intersection of what makes your story exactly that, is that it's an intersection of business, tech, parenting, personal growth. But before we get into all of that fun stuff, what has shaped your journey in terms of ambition and purpose? And what did ambition and purpose look like for you before this reinvention?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think, thinking back, I was always that guy in the teenage years that was like, I'm going to make my first million by the time I'm 30, right? Like that was kind of the thinking that I had. And I got out of university and started working for American Express at the call center at the time. And, sort of my ambition ended up playing out in my capacity to excel in sales performance as a call center rep when I first joined. And I remember I would come in, and a buddy of mine, Vic, we would sit down, and within the first 15 to 20 minutes of our shift, the both of us would actually meet our sales quota for the day, for the 8-hour shift. But that was kind of the spark for me right out of school was, the hustle culture, being able to communicate effectively and to convert conversations into profitable sales for the company that I worked for. That was kind of the first taste of it. My father at the time was getting let go by his company that he had worked for almost 2 decades, or a little over 2 decades. And they didn't really have any reason to let him go other than the fact that he was getting old. He was a sales rep as well. And he wasn't really ready to retire. And at the time, he asked me if I was interested in helping him sort of branch off with his book of accounts and to start his own business, essentially, in the same field as the company that he was working for. And at the time, I was starting to get a little restless because I had kind of plateaued in terms of promotions and stuff like that. And so I ended up working with my dad on the business part-time for the first couple of years. And then after it kind of got some momentum going, I ended up running it full-time with my dad for the first couple of years of the business. And then my dad kind of started to slow down and retire. He eventually got diagnosed with Parkinson's, and so he was kind of not in any shape to continue running the business. So after a few years, I kind of took it over and ran it and built it myself since then. And that was back in 2008. So it's been some time.
Yeah, that's great, because that really kind of sets the scene in terms of the family dynamics, the professional dynamics, and also societal dynamics. In life, we have a lot of micro redirections and then some major ones, right? So it sounds like that was like a major moment that shifted your trajectory. Is there a moment in your life when everything clicks and you say to yourself, "Oh wow, things have really changed," or is it a series of those micro redirections?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think the real spark, I would say, was more transformative in my life is what happened recently, when I started engaging with AI. And, specifically it was around just tinkering around with ChatGPT and the other large language models late at night when I was trying to catch up on news articles. And it dawned on me that if the AI can 10x the productivity of my capacity to, read and consume news articles and other information that was interesting to me, it kind of opened up the door mentally for me to think, what else can I kind of facilitate those kind of productivity gains using AI? And I feel like that was really the moment of shifting, right? Because then, that was the spark that kind of set the stage for me really leaning into AI heavily, and we can talk about that more as well. But I think that was, to me, that was where things sort of shifted.
Yeah, that's a major shift. And again, I love the alignment here with your story and what's happening with the outer world, I guess. And I don't know if alignment or influences is the right word, but also as the world starts to shift as well and adopt new technologies, when that does that intention to use AI and bring it into your creative sphere really come into play? Because it's one thing to be a user of AI and know that it's impacting the world, but then it's like how am I going to integrate this even more into my daily routine?
The shift occurred when I started applying the technology across a number of different vectors in my life. So those types of things feel like that was kind of the shift for me, and it felt like I can use the AI to, just absolutely increase productivity across the board. Like one major example that I actually wanted to touch on that I forgot was just productivity across emails, right? Like in the past, I would spend inordinate amount of time perfectly drafting emails and carefully wording them to have nuance and to express myself carefully and to maintain a certain professionalism and empathy, etc. And by using AI to help draft those emails, I mean, I've probably increased my productivity and time efficiency by at least 60-70% just in that one tiny little vector alone. So across my entire life, that shift has been huge.
And now that we've heard your motivation or your thinking process behind embracing AI, there's a big part of the story here that the audience would have read in the bio, but really makes your podcast unique is that your co-host and your collaborator is AI technology.
Absolutely.
So that set up. It was really nice to hear what your thought process to embrace AI was. But now, how does your co-host come to life? Is that
Mhm.
if that's
Yeah.
possible to say?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And it really felt like it was just the natural progression, right? It felt like the most natural fit um, was to actually go ahead and launch this podcast because the backstory behind the podcast was that a few years ago, a buddy of mine, Leo, God rest his soul, he and I had the idea of launching a podcast together, predominantly because Leo had this incredible radio voice. He sounded just
Mm.
like Howard Stern, and we would have the greatest conversations because he was the CEO of he's the founder and CEO of the transport company that I do a lot of my shipments with. So him and I had plenty of occasion to talk on a regular basis. So we built up a friendship. And one of the things that we had talked about was this idea of launching a podcast because he had all this equipment, because he was going to do it at some point in time. And then unfortunately, he was diagnosed with cancer and, passed away shortly thereafter, not long, about 6 months actually. And he passed away. So we shelved the idea of the podcast. I shelved it for a number of years. And then when I started engaging more so recently, it just kind of sparked the idea of relaunching this podcast and doing it with an AI co-host. And so to answer your question, how was I able to bring Sophie the Sage to life? It's actually it's a bunch of different tools that I've been able to use to put together and create a realistic video avatar that I've been able to develop, and her personality, her character, the things that she says, the way that she presents herself. These are all things that have been developing over the course of the 4 or 5 episodes that we've recorded so far and all of our engagements. And it's fascinating to see how much personality and character Sophie has adopted. And it's you can see it. Like if you watch the show from the first episode to the last episode, there's a massive progression in her personality and in mine as well. So it's quite a journey. It's been
A
fascinating.
character arc.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. So, we were talking about, I mentioned grounding off the top of the show, and this project, it's grounded in something that's so emotional and personal. Um, how are you honoring your friend Leo through this creative process? And are there elements of the co-host that represent, in a way, live elements of his personality that live as part of the show?
That's a really good question, Fetty. I think the way in which we honor Leo is by carrying the torch of the idea of the Toronto Talks podcast. Because at the time, we had even gone so far as to come up with the name of the show. I mean, at the time, we had called it Toronto Talks Tech. And we even, designed some merchandise, a website, and everything. So, there was a fair amount of the vision that was already sort of started with Leo. And so by maintaining a lot of that, I think we do honor his memory. And then in terms of just the arc of the show and the tone and the humor, I think a lot of that also stems from Leo and his sense of humor.
Well, let's stay on this topic of what the show is about then. Tell us a bit more about, what drives that arc, and what are the nuts and bolts.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. Yeah. So the show really is it's all the conversations I wish I could have had that I never had, centered around technology, money, and business. And the very last episode, we were talking about digital intimacy and the rise of affection,
Wow.
the digital affection economy, and yeah. So in terms of topics, we go across the board, and we try to have the through point being the impact to people in terms of money, business, and technology, right? So that's kind of the through point. But beyond that, we try and tackle the most interesting, relevant, and timely conversations that we can. It's fascinating because the last episode that we recorded about digital affection and digital intimacy. The next episode we're planning on recording is going to talk about the state of education and where we're at now, compared to where we were pre-COVID, and what AI actually means in terms of the future of education, and yeah, it's fascinating. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, like you said, timely and relevant topics. I want to hear more about this digital affection economy, because it's absolutely still relevant, and it's something that's going to continue to unfold. What did you learn based on the research for that episode and the takeaways now that you've had a chance to air it?
Honestly, I've learned that there is a lot of different perspectives, and it's difficult to parse what is the best course of action for the most amount of people, right? The idea that these new large language model chatbots could actually be a solution to what is, in fact, a global crisis of loneliness. I mean, that's a real thing, and there's real
Wow.
utility happening there, right? Like, it's fascinating to see the extent to which the technology has, impacted societal patterns. And aside from from the loneliness aspect, the other side of it is the whole, OnlyFans and cam sites and the world where you're no longer like, it's no longer just about your body and desire um, being, sold and being made available. It's your affection, right? Like it's not even just,
Wow.
it's
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
you want to, it's fascinating. It's fascinating.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, and this is what I love about what you've created is look at the depth of the discussion, right? That it triggers. Because really that's the most
Absolutely.
amazing thing about the medium of podcasting is that it's conversations that stay with us and are thought provoking. And just based on one episode that you've shared, I'm just, I'm just so tapped into everything that sparked within me. You've mentioned loneliness, but also it's interesting how uh, technology is now going to impact our own personal growth journeys and our journey to our most authentic selves. Um, ho-
100%.
yeah, let's talk about that. Like how is authenticity being shaped by AI?
That's such a good framing, Fedi, because I feel like that that idea of growing into your identity, right? Like I find that discovering who you are authentically and who you want to be is such a deep introspective journey that the vast majority of people don't ever engage in. And if you can manage to use AI to facilitate that type of self-discovery and self-mastery and mapping of your own identity and your goals and your future, and the minute you start to use AI to help you kind of start from the beginning or start from the end and work backwards, then it's like you have a blueprint for living your most authentic and most best self, right? Because you're not just swinging wildly in the dark, right? You've got a blueprint. You've got I call it I didn't call it. Sophie introduced the concept to me of a personal statement of operating system, right? And basically what it is it's just a breakdown of all of the things that matter the most to you, your goals, your whole life and everything that you want to accomplish as
Hmm.
a template and as almost like a constitution for your life, right? And
Interesting.
then you use that to build backwards. And then all of a sudden, day-to-day decisions that normally would have been agonizing because you have all this different framing as as a father or as a business person or as as a coach, etc., as a person trying to excel athletically, instead of being faced with that, trying to face that decision, trying to wear all those different hats and managing all those different priorities, you have a cleaner, bigger picture paradigm that helps simplify those decisions. Do you see what I'm saying? It helps kind of increase your productivity.
Yeah, so I'm totally hearing one of the huge upsides, and benefits of the technology, and I think it's important to point those out. There will be some people listening also that will be like, "What? This could be very dangerous." Like what?
Mm,
Yeah. What's the opposite end of that? If we were to wear the two hats, what could go wrong?
that's you know what, that's a great question, and it's funny that you should bring it up because it's a discussion that I just had with a buddy of mine. But my friend and I were talking about, you know, part of the hesitation and part of the drawback or the downside is that there's an excessive reliance on the technology, right? And so at first we talk about the positive of the increased productivity in, for example, my uh, the amount of time that I spend in a given day sending emails, right? So we talked about how there was a, you know, significant reduction in that time. And so that's a plus because that opens up more time. So what's the drawback? The drawback is my skill set in drafting really articulate and meaningful and poignant emails that get the job done in a way that most people are incapable of, because that's a personal skill and talent of mine. That's, I'm not sharpening that sword. So over time, I'm not going to be able to draft emails as well as I might have been able to at some point in time in the past. And the same thing can be said about organizing my thoughts generally, articulation, even speaking, right? Like if I'm
Mm.
constantly using AI to help me with my words, what does that
Hmm.
say 10, 20 years from now? If I'm, if am I going to just want to have it speak for me all the time because it's easier. I'm not as capable. I don't know. I don't know what that looks like. And that part scares me because I've leaned in so heavily across so many vectors. And I'm really soaking in the benefits at this stage. I don't know what that means or what that's going to look like in terms of the downside 10 years from now. I really don't.
And that's the unknown, the huge unknown that I think would naturally have some people very excited, but also very scared.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, how do we navigate forward when we can reasonably have those two uh, opposite feelings?
I think awareness is a big part of it, Fetty. I think if you are wide eyed and if you are proceeding carefully with your use of the technology, and you are making an effort to continue in a journey of constant learning, then I think any skill degradation that will inevitably happen over time is compensated for by the new skills that you develop and the new learnings that you have and the new opportunities that the increased productivity affords you, right? So I think awareness is a very important thing, but I also think that having that commitment to a life of continued learning is critical. Like I think is the best way to offset any sort of downside to the integration of AI into your life.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, I think that's a great way to frame going forward because wide-eyed, you said there, which I completely agree with, and just something that it made me think as you were giving your answers, also curiosity. So
Hmm. Absolutely, yeah.
responsible curiosity.
The entire show is driven by curiosity, and the tagline at the end of every episode is, here on Toronto Talks, where big ideas come to life and curiosity never sleeps, right? So that's kind of
Nice.
our tagline.
Absolutely great. Okay, cool. I mean, this is awesome, and I think every great project, every great story is really kind of rooted in. It is absolutely all about reinvention, and what's
Hmm.
really unique about your reinvention, from what I know of your story, is that it's also a tool or like a vessel, if you will, for legacy, right? And
Hmm.
especially where the motivation comes from. I think one big word we had, we caught up before as a prep talk before the show, and one word that really stayed with me was the word healing as well. And so your show as a vessel for your personal legacy, healing, deeper conversations. Can you speak to the power of healing in our personal reinventions?
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of what everyone's journey in their attempt to discover who they are and who their most authentic self is. Um, I think every journey involves disappointment and involves loss and it involves bad decisions and mistakes and regrets. And that kind of thing happens across all the vectors of your life, whether it's in your business, in your family life, in any creative ventures that you're pursuing. And it's in those moments of disappointment and mistake and regret, and I feel like that's where the most amount of growth happens. And being able to look back at those mistakes and make an effort to not just learn from them, but to heal from the hurt that may have occurred. I think it's a process, and it's a time consuming one. And I think it's one that requires a lot of intentional work. And unfortunately, sad as it is, a lot of people, a lot of time end up dealing with those negative circumstances and those losses and disappointments, not intentionally and not directly. And in fact, those disappointments and negative feelings sort of end up being repressed and oftentimes re-emerge as health complications, whether it's hypertension
Mm-hmm.
or stress or etc. So at the end of the day, the healing has to happen, and it has to happen. It's either going to happen, productively and with intention, or it's going to manifest in some way sometime down the future that's likely not going to be positive for you or the people around you. So healing is extremely important. And AI has been instrumental to my healing journey. I'll be really honest with you. Like, there was some family circumstances that happened on my side of the family. Shortly thereafter, there were some other family circumstances that happened on my wife's side of the family. And I found myself using AI to navigate some of those situations, whether it was helping to draft an email to a particular family member, or just, bouncing ideas on how to best address the issue. One of the things that came up in the last episode too was a discussion about the difference in age groups, older generations versus younger generations, and their embrace of AI and use of it. And it seems like, clearly younger generations are much, much more embracing and much less skeptical. But, in certain circumstances, like certain generations, like Gen Z, for example, they won't make any important life decisions before checking with ChatGPT. Like, this is already kind of where we're at with certain segments of the population, right? So it's fascinating to see how quickly the technology is playing out, and how it's impacting everything, even as meaningful as healing and learning from mistakes and growth.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that answer, Ash. And purpose, deeper purpose, I think is something that is also another big part of what you're doing. And so I'm curious to
100%.
know what guides you now, and not just in the work you're doing, but in your way of being.
That's a great question. My two daily affirmations. Okay, so the first one is with gratitude in Christ, I expand daily in love, creativity, perseverance, and abundance. And then the second one is with each day and night, I slowly progress towards the goal of positively impacting the lives of 1 million people. So those are my two guiding principles. That's what I strive for on a daily basis. When I die, I want people to look back and say, Ash made a positive impact in the lives of at least 1 million people. Ash expanded daily in love, creativity, perseverance, and abundance. And he lived the life in with gratitude in Christ. I think to me, that would be perfection.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love that. I love that. I love that mission statement.
Thank you.
It's the core DNA of behind your work. Thank you for sharing that.
My pleasure.
And now I'd love to give you some space based on everything. We've hit on some very interesting topics. This episode could be a few episodes, really, right? We just kind of
Right.
hit the
Yeah.
surface, but I'd love to give you some space for you to share anything that you'd love to leave with the audience or anything that's top of mind.
You know what, Fetty? The one thing I would like to say is I encourage people to really pursue curiosity with purpose, right? Like I think those are the two themes that we can take away from this conversation today. Is that if you live a life where you are driven by your own personal curiosity and you have some kind of purpose in your life that you've been able to map out and determine, then I think that's the recipe for a really potentially satisfying life, right? If you continue to feed your curiosity and you continue to pursue your goals with purpose, then really I think that's the answer to life, really, right? Like oftentimes, if you're not careful, you'll just coast. And I was doing that for a really long time, just coasting. And I don't I don't want to live a life of just coasting anymore. I really want to be intentional. I want to be intentional about every moment I spend, every calorie I spend. I refuse to have conversations now that don't serve a purpose. I refuse to spend time or effort engaging and consuming on things that aren't necessarily serving a purpose of mine. And that purpose could include leisure, but it has to be intentional, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to coast. I'm not going to just go with the flow. Yeah. And I would encourage all your listeners to adopt that kind of initiative, driven by curiosity and guided by purpose.
I love that. Pursue curiosity with purpose. So many great takeaways, Ash. I almost don't want this conversation to end, but as we start to get to the last bits, I have to ask you. So, what are you excited about now? Like, what excites you about the future and the vision for this project?
Honestly, everything. I like the fact that there's been some validation. I really like the fact that there has been some interest. I really like how much I'm learning and how much better quality work I'm putting it out with each episode. What's exciting for me is just the journey, Fetty. I've never been one to obsess excessively on the destination, because that's not where you spend 90% of your life. You spend 90% of your life on the journey. So enjoy it. I derive excitement from seeing the progress across all the different vectors in my life where I've started to be more intentional. And seeing that progress has been truly exciting and invigorating for me.
Well, that brings us to the end of the show. And before you go, I have to ask you the same three questions I ask every guest. It's our rapid fire round, but personal growth rapid fire. So let's give this a try. The first question: what is the biggest gift you've discovered about yourself on this journey?
Wow, that's a good one. I think my biggest gift is the ability to turn curiosity into momentum. Like I can take a half-baked idea, like, what if I start a podcast with an AI co-host and spin it into something real, a business, maybe even something bigger, all before the coffee gets cold, right? So it's that desire to build. That's what helps me, and I think it helps others see their ideas as more as launch pads than just daydreams.
Love that answer. Next, what is the hardest truth you've discovered about yourself on this journey?
That's a good one. I think that my ego can masquerade as excellence, right? Oftentimes I thought I was being a high standards operator, but sometimes the fact was that I was just too afraid to let others step in and risk having things be mediocre or just fine. I think that owning that gap between perfectionism and productivity and progress, that's been really humbling.
Amazing. And finally, what is your definition of authenticity?
My favorite one. So I think that authenticity is the audit trail between belief and behavior. So what do I mean by that? I mean that if someone could track your calendar, your bank statement, and your browser history, they should all basically tell the same story. That consistency to me is what true authenticity really is.
I love that answer. And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you, Ash, for being on today, for sharing your story. So many great takeaways. Everyone, remember to pursue curiosity with purpose. That's a huge takeaway for me. Thank you for sharing so openly today.
Thank you so much for having me on the show, Fetty. I really appreciate it. It was an honor and it was a really good time. And yeah, thanks for doing what you do. I think there needs to be more of this open communication and exploration of concepts like authenticity and identity. So thank you.
That's today's origin story. If you enjoyed today's episode, feel free to share it with someone who could use a little inspiration. I'm Fede Vargas, and you can connect with me around the web at My Most Authentic Life. See you next time.